We're going to be continuing on in the life of Abraham, but not just in Abraham's story. If you guys were here last week, you know that we had started talking about his D.I.L, his daughter-in-law, and that process. So last week, the message was called What's the D.I.L Part 1. This week is called What's the D.I.L Part 2. All about his daughter-in-law and how that connection happened and what that meant in God's bigger story. If you're going to follow along in your paper Bible, we're going to be in Genesis chapter 24. We're going to be looking at verses 29 through 33, and then we're going to jump ahead to verses 49 to 67, and I'll explain why we're kind of jumping over those when we get there. So because this is a part 2, I want to give you guys kind of just a recap of part 1 to kind of get you caught up and let you know where we are. So last week, Abraham wanted to send his servant, who I think was Eliezer, to find a wife for his son, Isaac. But in order to go find this wife, Abraham gave some rules. He said, don't pick a Canaanite. And the reason why is Canaanites were sinful people, and God was about to wipe them out, and God didn't want to use them to start his chosen people. So no Canaanites. Then he said, when you do find someone, don't force her to come back with you. Right? If she doesn't want to come, then let her stay. Also, he said, don't take Isaac out of the promised land, so don't take my son to her either, okay? So that's the way that this has to work out. If you find the woman and she's not willing to come back, or she wants Isaac to go to her or whatever, that's fine. You're released from your duty. You can come home, and then we'll figure it out then, okay? So that was the rules. So what happened, Eliezer went ahead and took off, and he went north to try to find a wife, and he found a watering hole. And at this watering hole, this is where kind of all the young ladies hung out. So he was sitting there praying to God, trying to get the right woman for his son. And so basically he said, God, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to ask these women for a sip. The right one for Isaac, let her not only give me a sip, but then offer to give water to my camels as well, which, was actually quite a bit of work. So he ends up praying, and he says, God, send this woman to me. Before he even finishes praying, Rebekah shows up and does everything he asked God for, and even worked the 2+ hours it would have taken to water all 10 of his camels, okay? So to him, it was clear, this has got to be the woman. So he says, whose daughter are you? And she says, well, I'm the daughter of Bethuel, and it's like, oh, so you're related to Abraham. Okay, cool. So this is perfect then. So he ends up giving her a nose ring on the side here, or this side. No, I think it's this side. Gives her a nose ring, which is like basically an engagement ring, saying, hey, she's now going to be betrothed to Isaac, and she accepts it. All right, so that's where we are in the story. That was the last thing we heard. Now we're going to hop in, and we're going to see what happens when her family gets involved. So let's go ahead and turn to Genesis 24, verse 29. Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Laban ran out towards the man to the spring. As soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arms and heard the words of Rebekah his sister, thus the man spoke to me, he went to the man. And behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. He said, come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and a place for the camels. So the man came to the house and unharnessed his camels and gave straw and fodder to the camels, and there was water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. So notice the behavior here of what we've seen from Rebekah and now also Laban, her brother, right? It's evident that they come from a home where hospitality is a value, right? They're being very friendly. I mean, look at this brother and sister. They know how to treat their guests. They're selfless. They're kind. They bestow honor. They show genuine care. I mean, these are good, hospitable people. Now, on the other side later, we're going to learn that Laban is not perfect. This is when Jacob comes onto the scene. So he's not perfect, but, the reality is it seems like he at least has hospitality as a value in his household. Now, if you grab your Connect card on the way in, we're going to fill in some blanks here this morning, and here's your first one. First fill in the blank is this. Children often reflect the values of their environment. Okay, that's what we see here in this story, right? Every reliable source suggests that parents have a significant impact on their children. Nobody's going to argue with that, right? Now, as kids get older, their influences start to branch out with kids at school or media or whatever the case is. But the truth is, the foundation of it is really established by the parents, and the parents are always an influence. I have yet to meet a kid where I'm like, you're nothing like your parents at all, absolutely different, right? I see no impact from your parents in your life. I've never met a kid like that. Even if it's opposite, it's from their parents, because sometimes you'll see a family, it's like the dad is an alcoholic, and then their kid becomes an alcoholic, and it's like, well, I grew up in a house, everybody was always drinking, it seemed normal, I wanted to be cool, so I started drinking too. Or then you'll see another kid, and the kid's like, I saw what it did to my dad, he was a mess up, I don't want to be anything like that guy, so I've never touched a drop of alcohol in my life, and I never will. right? Two opposite landing places, but both of them are caused by their parents, right? So oftentimes we see that. So that means as parents, we have a responsibility to teach our kids good values and then to give them reasons to want to keep those values, right? I mean, we might teach our kids all the best things that we can, right? We'll say, you know what, you want to have a relationship with God, you want to be good to people, you want to stand for what is right, but then you ram it down their throats and you treat them like garbage, and it's like, well, I don't want to do that because I don't like you, right? So the thing is that we have to teach our kids good things and give them reasons to want to follow it. Because the reality is the things that you instill in your kids are going to affect them when they go off into the world by themselves. And that's what Rebekah's about to do, right? She's leaving her household now, about to marry this guy. And so she's about to find out whether her values have been established well or not. And for Abraham, this is a positive thing, right? You know, Bethuel taught their kids the value of hospitality, and now Rebekah is going to find a good husband. This is a good thing for her. And this is actually more than just good for her. It's good for everyone through all time, because this is going to establish God's chosen people where the Messiah will come from and provide our salvation thousands of years later. So this is a really important thing that's happening, okay? So let's check this out. Let's go on to verse 33. Then food was set before him to eat, but he said, I will not eat until I have said what I have to say. And he said, speak on. So Eliezer is all about getting this job done. I'm not even going to have a bite of food until I tell you what's up, okay? So this next chunk of passages here from verses 34 through 47, it's in the YouVersion app if you want to read along. Okay, but basically what he's going to do is he's going to recap everything we said last week. He's just going to say it again. So if you really want to read it, you have it on YouVersion in front of you. If you missed it, you can always go online and watch last week's sermon and get all the details that way. But here's the thing. Eliezer gets excited and he tells Laban, man, here's everything that's happened. Here's what God's doing. He's bringing all this stuff together. Abraham is old. His son needs a wife. And I've been praying to God, and he brought me here. And then your sister came, and she's the right woman. She's Abraham's relative. She's a virgin. She's someone who gives water to my camels when I ask for a sip. So it's all this good stuff. And then Rebekah came, and I gave her the nose ring so she can marry my master's son. And then Eliezer closes out his story this way. After he says all that stuff, gives all the detail, he closes out like this in verse 48. He says, then I bowed my head and I worshiped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now then, if you're going to show steadfast love and faithfulness to my master, tell me. And if not, tell me, that I may turn to the right hand or to the left. He says, listen, here's the thing. Here is what God has done. But there's one more thing for you, Laban. So you remember the rules, right? No Canaanites, don't take Isaac there, and don't force the woman. But Eliezer is also not going to force her family to let her go either. Right? Eliezer's like, this is all going to be voluntary. If you're going to follow God's plan, you have to make the choice yourself. I'm not going to force you to do what God wants you to do. He says, now this is your part. Are we going to do this or not? And if we're not, then let me know, and I'll just move on. He's saying, look, you have been an answer to my prayers from the get-go and the prayers of my master. God is doing this, so what are you going to do? I'm not going to beg you. I'm not going to argue with you, and I'm not going to get mad, right? God's doing this, so you better get on board. He's going to smite thee, right? He's not getting angry with them. But at the same time, he's not going to lie to him either. He's like, this is from God. This is what God's doing, so you're going to have to either get on board or don't. He's just being honest. Matter of fact, hearing the truth matters way more than just hearing what we want to hear. You know, as Christians, we feel this pressure to perform sometimes, right? Like it's like, the world is messed up. I have to go save it. I got to go share the gospel. I got to go preach to people. I got to go do all these things to get their attention, right? And we put that weight on our shoulders like we have to go accomplish that. And then the world turns around and gives us rules back in our face. I don't want to hear about this Jesus guy. Right? What are the two things you don't talk about at the dinner table? Politics and Jesus. Right? So the world is like, I don't want to hear it. But we're like, but we have to tell you. And we make it all creepy and scary and uncomfortable. It's like, because I have to do this for you. We put that pressure on ourselves. But actually, the truth is, our role in sharing the gospel is actually a lot more simple than what we try to make it to be. You know, Francis Chan said this, and I love Francis Chan. He says, when I read through the Bible, what hit me the most was I'm reading one prophet after the next, and they all sound the same. Then you get to Jesus. He sounds just like them. Then you get to the apostles. Everyone sounds the same. They have the same tone, directness, and I'm like, I don't sound like them. No one sounds like them. Then he says, this is how you get people to your gatherings. You're thinking, what do people want to hear and what will turn them off? And that determines what you're going to say. And I'm going, they didn't teach that way. They just said it. They just said it. See, here's the thing, church. We are not salesmen. We don't have to come up with some specially crafted trickery to, make people think they have to know God because we have nailed them into the corner with our wit and our, beautiful pamphlets or whatever the case is. We think we have to do all these things. But the truth is, if you look at the Bible, when they're sharing the gospel, they just say it. It's like respond or don't. We're also not God's police force. We're not supposed to go around just getting mad at everybody who's not a believer who's sinning. If they don't believe, why would they behave? That's not our job. The truth is we're supposed to let God do his job. He lets us take part in it, but it's not about manipulation or crafting or being angry or arguing. Honestly, church, when you measure my job up here, whether or not I'm doing a good job, it shouldn't be, well, how's attendance looking? If attendance is up, he's doing a good job. How's the budget? If we have more money, he's doing a good job. Actually, the question should be, is he telling the truth? That's my measurement up here. Am I telling you the truth? And so Eliezer says straight up, this is what God's doing. So are you going to do it or not? That's all there is to it. There's no trickery, just honesty. Here's what you're going to do, or here's what God's doing. Will you do it? Let's go ahead on to verse 50 and see how they respond. Then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, the thing has come from the Lord. We can't speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. See, Rebekah's dad and brothers say, yeah, of course. If God is doing this, what does it matter what I think? Take her to Isaac then. It's not just about them making a decision. It's about them saying, well, I believe in God, so if this is what he's doing, then we're on board. And if God has done this, all these cool things, how can we really argue? See, church, here's your next fill in the blank this morning. It's hard to argue when you see God move. It's hard to argue when you see God move. I challenge you after church today, go talk to people in here and be like, hey, when you got saved, was it because you lost an argument? Right? How often do we think man, if I just get to these atheists and I just lay out my argument and slam them to the ground, then they'll want to know the Lord. Probably not, right? I don't know anybody that came to Christ that way. Matter of fact, every time I talk to somebody, how did you come to Christ? Their response is some variation of, there was somebody else in my life that I got to see who knew the Lord. Even if you were raised in the household and you saw your parents that way, right? You see what God has done for other people, and when you see that, it's really hard to argue with. It's like, I used to be this way, then I met Jesus, now I'm this way. Do what you will with it. That's how I came to know the Lord, right? It's that simple, really. And so the reality is here, there's no arguing. And they're like, well, if that's what God's doing, I can't argue with you. You're telling me all this stuff he's done. Clearly God is in charge, and clearly he's powerful. Clearly he's on the move. So, all right, take Rebekah. So let's see what happens next, verse 52. When Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed himself to the earth before the Lord. And the servant brought out jewelry of silver and of gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave to her brother and to her mother costly ornaments. So at this moment, it's official. Eliezer has seen God move completely in a wonderful way. And his response to that is he bows to the earth and he says, thank you, Lord. You have done this. Thank you. And then he gets up and he just starts raining gifts down on all the family, right? Ornaments and jewelry and gold and all this, stuff for them. So really what's going on here is Eliezer can finally relax. He feels like he's accomplished his mission. I've done what God has sent me to do, all right? So now that he can relax, he's going to go ahead and take a bite of that food that was on the table. Let's look at verse 54. And he and the men who were with him ate and drank, and they spent the night there. When they arose in the morning, he said, send me away to my master. Her brother and her mother said, let the young woman remain with us a while, at least 10 days. After that, then she can go. Now, this is quite the scene, okay? Yesterday, they were saying, yes, take her. God is clearly at work. We're not going to stop you. And then something happens in the morning, and they don't feel quite the same way, right? Now, there's two different ideas about what happens here. Because we know about the kind of guy Laban ends up being later on, some people think that all Laban is trying to do is get more stuff out of Eliezer. Like, oh man, look at all those gifts. Did we give her away too cheap? Let's get more stuff out of this guy. That's a possibility. He could be a swindler like that. It would make sense. But I think there's more to the story. I think what actually happened is that the gravity of the situation hit them. You know, oftentimes when somebody dies in our church, and I'm trying to help and console the family, obviously I talk to them when it happens, but I intentionally try to go back to them 2 to 4 weeks later, because that's a very specific time frame in the grieving process. Because when somebody passes away, you know, it's like we got to plan the funeral, we got to divvy up the stuff, we got all this family flying in. People aren't really processing anything. It's just busy, and it's like trying to get stuff done. But then 2 to 4 weeks afterwards, it's like the cards stop coming, and the phone stops ringing, and the family flies home, and now it's quiet, and my loved one is gone. And that's when it starts to set in. That's when I try to make the phone call, because that's when things get especially hard, because things have had a chance to settle down. And I think that's what's happening here, right? Is it's like this guy shows up and is like, hey, I'm looking for a wife for my master's son, and Rebekah said she would do it. And they're all excited. Yay, here's some gifts. Let's have a big feast. This is going to be fun. And then the next morning, she's ready to go, and they're like, wait. I mean, think about it. Yesterday began as a normal day, right? All we did was send her to go get water, and she came back engaged with a nose ring and bracelets on. Like, how did that turn around so fast? Our little girl just went to go to the grocery store. And now she came back and she's married to a guy. She's going to be engaged to this guy that I've never even met before. Like, how did this happen? So I think it began as a normal day, and this day is turning into we're never going to see our daughter again. That's a big deal, church. This wasn't some years-long betrothal. It happened yesterday. And now she's going to be 300 miles away. I mean, that's like from here to Cincinnati. I mean, today we can drive that in 4 or 5 hours, right? But back then, that's weeks of travel on a camel. You know, I moved away from California in 2018, and I've been back there twice, and we have airplanes. It's a pretty safe bet that there's a good chance that they're not going to ever see Rebekah ever again. And they're saying, please just give us 10 days to process this, to spend time with our daughter, to say goodbye. Give us 10 days. And I understand that. They might be saying goodbye forever. Who wouldn't ask for 10 more days? 10 more years even, if it's your little girl. And now think about this. They know Abraham, but they've never met Isaac. They don't know what kind of guy he is. They're about to send their daughter off, and they may never even know if she's in an abusive marriage. They may never find out. It's not like they had the postal service or Skype or FaceTime or something. They had no way of knowing. So it's kind of a scary thing, but honestly, church, as Christians, we know a little bit of something about God's timing. If you've been a Christian for a while, you know that God's timing doesn't always work out the way you want it to work out. Matter of fact, it probably usually doesn't work out the way you want it to work out, right? If we want something, we want it now. If we don't want something, we can take our time with this, Lord. I'm going to drag my feet on this one. So let's see how this goes in verse 56. Eliezer says to them, do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master. And they said, well, how about we call the young woman and ask her? And they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will go. So Eliezer says, look, I know you love your daughter and you miss her, but God is moving and we got to go. So please don't stand in God's way. That's what he's saying. You know, God doesn't like it when we drag our feet, church. You know, Jesus put it this way when there was a disciple who was trying to drag his feet. In Matthew 8:21, it says, another of the disciples said to him, Lord, let me first go and bury my father. And Jesus said to him, follow me and leave the dead to bury their own dead. Church, when God is moving, he's moving. And that means we got to get up and walk with him. We can't drag our feet like some kid being drug out of a grocery store or something, right? It's like, no, God's moving. Let's go. Either get on or get off. It's an important thing. We have to trust him, and we have to go at his pace. Matter of fact, that's your next fill in the blank. When God is moving, don't try to stop him. When God is moving, don't try to stop him. And honestly, if Rebekah's family wants to do the best thing for her, church, what's the best thing for her? To put her in the center of God's will. If God is moving this way and the daughter's asking a question, the answer is yes, go where God is leading you. Follow God. Do God's thing. I mean, think about it. How often do I hear stories of people that want to be missionaries and their parents are like, I don't want my child to go there. It's dangerous. And it's like, but they have to go where God wants them to go. I know you want to hold back because you're afraid, but that's not how God works. He does it his way, and we have to move with him. And that's honestly what they should want for Rebekah. That's why Jesus prayed, nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. Jesus would have been very happy to say, nope, I'm not going to go to the cross and experience all that. But more than that, he wanted to do what God wanted to do. He wanted to be obedient to the will of the Father. So instead of choosing, they can't even make this choice, right? They're like, bring in Rebekah and ask her. What does Rebekah say? And they say, you know what, Rebekah, you can either get up and move 300 miles away to marry a man you don't know, or you can stay home where it's comfortable and familiar. What's your choice? And she says, I will put God's will before my own. And honestly, in doing this, she's throwing away some things that in our culture we really, really value, right? She's throwing away safety. She's throwing away comfort. She's throwing away familiarity. She's throwing away the ability to choose her own husband, right? And that's wild to us today, church. Think about this. If a woman marries a man without meeting him first today, we call that a reality show. It's so crazy to us that we're entertained by watching people do it, right? It's called Married at First Sight. It's on Lifetime. I've never watched it, but I can tell you that two people meet for the first time and get married right away. And actually, there's some of them that are still together today. Think about that, though. There were more seasons of this show than people that actually stuck it out, which means in our culture, we can't even stick out the deal. But back then, there wasn't much of a choice. So this is pretty wild for Rebekah to be doing this, right? But she did it because she wanted to honor God. She says, God's clearly at work. I'm not going to stand in his way. I'm going to go. All right, so let's see how this plays out. Verse 59. So they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, now catch this, our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and may your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him. Then Rebekah and her young women arose and rode on the camels and followed the man. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Now, I imagine this is a heavy scene, right? Eliezer's loading up the camels. You got the men running around and working, and Rebekah walks out, and she's ready to go, and her family is hanging on her in tears. Please don't go. Are you sure this is what you want to do? Please think about this. And she's like, yes, I'm going to go. I'm going to go. And Eliezer's like, Rebekah, we got to go. Come on. And so in the midst of this, her family, as she's getting ready to leave, she's getting ready to mount her camel, and the last thing they say to her is they say, well, then let me send you off with a blessing. And even this blessing shows more proof about how God's will is involved in this situation. I love this part. They say, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and they say, may your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him, which is really interesting because if you go back to Genesis 22, this is a reminder of what God promised Abraham. Okay, so back in Genesis 22:17, this is for Abraham. God says, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore, and your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. So back in Genesis 22, God says to Abraham this blessing, and then Rebekah's parents give her the exact same blessing. People and the gates of your enemies. And it's like, wow, do you need any more proof that God is in this? They're quoting Scripture before Scripture was Scripture. It's really an incredible send-off to say, hey, we want you to go and receive the same blessing that Abraham had, because Rebekah is going to be that first fork of Abraham's family tree. She is going to go continue that promise from God by being a part of his family. And so she climbs up on her camel and she heads off down the road. And her family's probably watching and crying, and her mom's like, please don't leave. And the dad's like, I'll go with you halfway just to make sure you get saved. They're not wanting her to go, but she's going. And they're happy for their daughter. They're thrilled that God is being honored, but they're devastated at what the loss means for them. This is their little girl. This is their sister. And they'll probably never see her again. All right, let's see what happens now in verse 62. Now Isaac had returned from Beer-lahai-roi and was dwelling in Negev. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening, and he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifts up her eyes, and when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel. Now remember that word. She was dismounted from the camel and said to the servant, whoa, who is that man walking in the field to meet us? And the servant says, "It is my master." And she took her veil and covered herself. So if we fast forward a couple weeks, right, we see that Rebekah gets to Isaac and he's outside, he's praying and he's meditating. And this was a thing because back then they believed if you were inside, God couldn't hear you, he couldn't see you because he had a roof over your head. So they would go outside to pray so that there was like a direct line of sight to outer space, basically, to see God, right? So that's what he was outside doing, in a field, praying and meditating to the Lord. Now here's what I see here, and I'll tell you why in a minute, but here's the next point, all right, your next fill in the blank. Good marriages begin with godly foundations. All right, good marriages begin with godly foundations. So let me explain to you why I see that in this part of the story. Now, Isaac is sitting in the field and he's praying, right? Meditating to the Lord. Now, I don't know what he's praying for in that specific moment, but I would guess if I was him, I'd be like, "Lord, please don't make her ugly. Please don't make her mean. Please don't make her barren," right? Like you're praying for these things because you're about to sign up for a pretty long-term deal. And it's like, I want some good things in this. So that's probably what he's praying about. And then he looks up and he's like, "Oh my gosh, they're here. It's the camels." And then Rebekah sees them and she's like, "Whoa, who is that?" Now you might think that's not in the Greek or the Hebrew, like you're adding that in. No, actually, here's the thing. That dismounted the camel thing, when Hebrew scholars, when Jews read that, what they see is that Rebekah fell off her camel. She saw her husband and was like, "Whoa," passed out and fell off her camel. Why? Why would that ever happen? Well, actually, a Jewish rabbi would tell you that Rebekah had never seen a person who could communicate directly with God before. So when she saw that, she was like, "Whoa," fell off the camel. It was attractive to her. And then Eliezer says, "Yeah, that's the guy right there." And immediately she covers her face. Now, when she covers her face, that was a sign back then of chastity, of humility, and of submission. So here's what I'm seeing there. Single guys, all right, single guys in here, if you want to sweep a woman off her feet, show her your relationship with God. Show her how much you love the Lord. Single ladies, you want to win over a good man? Anchor yourself on things like chastity and humility and submission. And don't rely just on how you look. Because if you rely on how you look, you can win a man, but I can't promise he'll be a good one. Right? Actually, what I'm really saying here, in other words, is if you want to land a godly spouse, work on the things of God. Let those be the attributes that wins the person over, and you look for those in other people. That's where godly relationships come from. All right, let's go ahead and close out the passage this morning. Verse 66. And the servant told Isaac all the things he had done. Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife. And he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Now, this is a beautiful scene. Men, married men, if you have any brains on you, remember the importance of a woman's love, okay? There's a reason why at our church we have men's ministries and we have women's ministries. Because even though men and women are equal in value, we are definitely different types of people, right? Men and women are just different. We're just wired differently. It's just how it is. The reality is if you want to make a guy, you want to make a husband happy, give him a plate of nachos and turn the game on. He's good to go, right? You're set. But you want to make a wife happy, you better make sure that she has her family together and that everyone's at peace with each other. I mean, think about this for a second, right? How many families do you see where it's like you have this matriarch at the core, and like when Thanksgiving, Christmas, holidays, whatever comes along, the whole family goes to her house, right? And she's got everything planned and everything's ready and everything's made, and that's what people go do. Then the mom passes away and the dad's in charge and they never see each other again. Because women hold the keys to the love of a family. They just do. And we're wise to keep that in mind. And so basically, that's what Sarah's tent was in this camp. That place where Sarah would go, that central loving family figure. Right? Her tent was the place where you would go as a kid when you were hungry. "Mom, there's nothing to eat." You go to the tent, mom would say, "Okay, honey, let me get you something." Right? It's the place where you go when you were a kid and you fell down and you hurt your knee and you're like, "Mommy, I need you to kiss my knee. I have a boo-boo." Right? That's the place you go. You go to your mom's tent. It's the place you would go when you're 30-something years old and you still need a hug from your mom. That's where he would go, that tent, that central place of love in the camp. And I'll bet there were plenty of times over the last year or so where Isaac would start walking to the tent to see his mom and realize on the way, oh, that's right, my mom's gone. She's not there anymore. So he was struggling with this. This was a deep pain that he was dealing with for a year or more. And he was struggling with it, and then he takes Rebekah there. And you might think that it might be weird to take your bride to your mom's tent, but actually, he's doing this because he's saying, Rebekah, you are now that center of the love of the family. You are the lady of this household. This is yours. This is your place of honor. This is the place where our kids are going to come when they have boo-boos or when they're hungry or when they need a hug from mom. You're going to have this place now. And then something great happens. They consummate the marriage, and it says that Isaac loves Rebekah. He loves her. And it doesn't say this directly, but I'm pretty sure that she loved him too. It doesn't say that she does, but it says that he was comforted after his mother's death. And guys, if you've ever loved a woman and hung out with her and she didn't like you, you would know. And you wouldn't be comforted by that, right? So the fact that she's comforting her husband in this moment, enough to take away the pain of his mom's death, you can bet that she loved him too. So what do we learn in this story? Okay, so they picked up a wife, brought her back. You know, what do we see here? Well, honestly, we see Abraham doing his part to find a wife for Isaac. We see Eliezer doing his part to set out and retrieve her. We see Rebekah doing her part to leave her family. We see Bethuel and Laban doing their part to let their daughter and sister go. And all these things were done for one purpose. The one purpose was to continue on with the will of God, to take part in what God was doing. So, church, if there's one thing you're going to take home today, one thing from this message you're going to take home, I ask you to take this home, your last fill in the blank this morning. Wonderful things happen when God's people come together. Wonderful things happen when God's people come together. One of my favorite things about Sunday morning is walking around and just seeing people, seeing what they do. Right? You head downstairs and you look at the nursery and you see these people, playing with the kids and they're having a good time, and you turn around and there's the coffee area there and there's just so many conversations going on. And, second service is about ready to begin and there's still 1 million people in the sanctuary. It's like, we got 2 minutes, guys, because people are just talking and hanging out together. You look at the education building and these kids pour out the door, and then you enter the room this morning and, people are just praising God. All of us, believers of God, coming together on a Sunday morning to worship together, to have community together. And honestly, I just thank God that his people still come together. After thousands of years, we still think it's important to come together and gather as God's church. I think that's pretty amazing. We read these stories about Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and then their kids, and it just goes on and on and on. And then we start to think like we're completely separate from them. Like we have the Bible and then we have us and it's different. But that's not true. We are a continuation of God's story. God's story is still being told. We're just living it right now. Sometimes I think about what it's going to be like when we go to heaven. Sometimes like now you ever walk around and you say to someone like, hey, what high school did you go to? Right? It's a common question because we all know something. You probably went to high school. And you ask them, it's like, oh, I went to Dunlap. Oh, I went to Morton. Oh, I went to East Peoria. Or I was homeschooled. Right? Whatever. And for me, I'm like, I went to Ontario High School. And people are like, Canada? No. So it's like, we have this common thing that we all understand about each other. They're different, but it's all part of the American experience, right? And I think it's going to be like that when we go to heaven, and it's going to be like, hey, so what part of God's story were you in? Oh, I was part of Abraham's camp. Oh, wow, really? What about you? Oh, I was exiled to Babylon. Really? What about you? I was part of the church age. Some of us might even go, you know what? I was a part of the church age right before Jesus came back, and I went through the rapture. All of us are going to be a part of God's story. It's not that we're any different or any better. It's that we're just, I guess we are a little bit different because we have different experiences, right? Different parts of the story, but it's still all part of God's story. It's one continuing story of God's creation and what he's doing with it. And we all get to be a little bit of a part of that, and we are still living that out even today. And I think that's pretty awesome. And through all of history, from the beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible, we see that when God's people come together, amazing things happen. That's why he tells us to do it. So the truth is, church, if you're a person who's just been on the fringe at church, or maybe you're just starting to come around, I encourage you to get active and be a part of the body of Christ. I encourage you to keep coming to church, but then join a life group, serve in a ministry, head to Africa if you want to. Just start being a part of what God is doing. I promise you, church, it is way more exciting than just deciding to stay home and doing what's comfortable for you.